Welcome to Socialism 2008, the final rally. Socialism every year is an astounding event. Hundreds and hundreds, if not 1,000 people came this year, and there are too many people, literally too many people to thank for putting on this event on a shoestring budget. And I would say we would have to probably thank half the people in the audience by name if we were to, in fact, describe how many people had a direct hand in making this conference a success. So, on behalf of the Socialism organizing team, please give yourselves a round of applause. And by way of saving some time today, I think we can safely say that at last night's rally, we did enough to thank all of the international guests and the representatives of all the different struggles that are here participating in the conference. So let's give them a round of applause. However, I'd like to start today with a comrade who is not here today with us. And many of you will know him as Peter Miguel Camejo. And probably many of you have heard him speak at Socialism before. You've seen him on television debating Arnold Schwarzenegger, or you've seen him in the streets fighting for a better world. Peter last year developed cancer, and after a long battle fought it off. After a tremendous battle defeated cancer. Unfortunately, the cancer has come back, and now he's in round 2. And this is a very difficult struggle. I'm sure that if anybody can beat it back, Peter Camejo can. But I wanted to say a couple words about Peter, because I think that Peter, even though he's not here in person, is here in spirit, in socialist spirit with us today. And I'm sure that he wishes he were here. So I would just like to say a few things about him. First, I think that Peter's participation in socialism and our participation with Peter in the struggle is part of a process about the ISO learning how to develop more allies, to learn from past generations, to learn from other people who have different experiences and come from different traditions. We have a lot to teach, but we also have a lot to learn, and Peter has been a very important part of that process for us. I first met Peter Camejo in 2003, and there's people here today who've known him for far longer. Peter has been in the struggle for 50 years. So I can't say that I'm Peter Camejo's oldest friend, but I am a dear friend nonetheless. When I first met him, it was sort of funny because we met each other, we didn't really know anything about each other, and I sort of had a suspicion that maybe, just maybe, he was a little bit of an opportunist. And I think he had a suspicion that the ISO was maybe just a little bit sectarian. And so we met in this cafe, and we kind of had this conversation where we were like, wow, how'd you get here? And what do you do? And wow, that's interesting how you've developed over the years. And after about 5 minutes, we happily realized that our preconceptions of each other, I think, were incorrect. And really, from the first moment, developed, I think, an extremely important collaboration and really not only a comradeship, but a friendship. Peter was, for people who don't know, a leading revolutionary in the 1960s, a fighter in the civil rights movement and in the anti-war movement. And for people who've heard Peter speak, I think it's safe to say that if not one of the best propagandists for socialist ideas in the latter part of the 20th century. Now, the 80s were tough times for all revolutionaries, and people who went through it as revolutionaries can say so. But Peter found a way to be involved and found a way to get back into the thick of the political struggle. When he ran for governor of California on the Green Party ticket in the year 2002 and got 5% of the vote. The next year, because of the political crisis in California in the recall election, Peter managed to fight his way into the televised debates. And for the first time, really, that we can remember or we're sure about in American history, a left-wing candidate participated on par with the Democrats and the Republicans. And hands down, people believe that Peter won those debates against Schwarzenegger and the Democratic Party. And then we all know in 2004, Peter took the courageous stand of standing up against the anybody but Bush wave with Ralph Nader and said, we need to build a political alternative. And John, reporting for duty, Kerry, is not that alternative. We need something better. And if anybody heard Peter speak during those years of 2003 and 2004, you remember one thing about his speeches, which is when people said the Iraqi people do not have the right to resist, Peter, in any forum, in front of any camera, in front of any radio microphone, would say straight the truth straight out, which is that the Iraqi people, without the resources, without an air force, without the tanks, without the guns, they have found a way to resist with their bodies and their lives against the most brutal occupation in our lifetime, and we owe them a debt of gratitude. So it's been a privilege knowing and working alongside Peter, and we are confident that if anybody can beat this second round of cancer, it is Peter Miguel Camejo. I want to give the last word to him. He said this in 1969 at a socialist convention. He said, "The key to victory is moving the masses. Any concept, any struggle that eliminates this will only end in disaster, and there is no shortcut to change the system." And I think that with those words, we welcome Peter Camejo in spirit to Socialism 2008. I want to begin with our shorter list of speakers tonight. We have Alan Maass and Sharon Smith. For people who have not seen it yet, you've probably all seen it, but Socialist Worker print edition, the first edition in color. And we already thanked last night, but Josh and Derek's work, along with Alan and the rest of the SW staff, of putting SW, the daily SW online edition, is a tremendous advance. And as Layla El-Arian said last night, Socialist Worker is one of the few papers, means of communication that tells the truth about what is happening in this country. Socialist Worker today is read by tens of thousands of people. I am fully convinced that it is going to be read by millions in the future. Alan Maass, the editor of Socialist Worker, I believe has been one of the best kept secrets in journalism in this country, but I think that that is not going to stay the same for long. So I give you Alan Maass.
Thanks. I think I'd like to start by adding my tribute to Peter Camejo. And, I also met him only recently, and in the midst of not, particularly easy times when you looked at the Nader-Camejo campaign of 2004, and yet was impressed with the same thing that Todd was about his ability as a speaker to crystallize the principles that we fight for of equality and freedom and justice. And I think because he was such a good speaker that he wouldn't have the same problem that I have right now, but I'm not as good, so I'm just going to say it right out, which is that Dave Zirin got to my first punchline before me. Not that I'm a Jewish anti-Zionist. I am an anti-Zionist, but I was going to point out as well that this is the last socialism that'll take place during the foul presidency of George W. Bush. And when I was thinking about this, I decided, at the beginning of socialism, I'd take an informal count of how many times George Bush's name came up in the discussions at the meetings, in a contemporary context, what he's doing now, not the 2003 invasion or, partying at Yale or something, but what he's doing today. So here's my counts. Has liberalism made a comeback? 5 mentions, 2 by me. Iraq, eyewitness to occupations, 3 mentions in a contemporary context during an hour and a half. U.S. mercenaries in Iraq, what's at stake, a grand total of 7 mentions. Now, I might have missed a couple because honestly, after a while, I totally lost interest in this experiment, but that's part of the point. Because almost no one can be bothered to pay attention to anything that George Bush says or does anymore. The most powerful leader on earth. How many years ago now, he was leading the war to remake the Middle East, and his relevance to the discussion of politics at Socialism 2008 or just about anywhere else is almost zilch, such as the state of the Bush presidency after a series of catastrophic failures, the failure in Iraq, the economic catastrophe that's only getting worse. And you know, it's not just among us who have hated and despised George Bush for so long, but even the bourgeoisie and its mouthpieces, the Wall Street Journal, act like he's an embarrassment that they have to try to ignore. It's like old George Bush who went to war in the Middle East to control oil when it was $30 a barrel, and now it's up to $130 a barrel and rising. What a screw-up. And as for the Bush administration and what's left of it, you have to say that it's almost like they're not going through the motions anymore. Earlier this year, the administration, with the help, of course, of the Democratic majority in Congress, helped to kill a $1 billion proposal to create youth jobs. But to make up for it, the Justice Department did give a $500,000 grant for an inner-city sports program, which was aimed at stopping juvenile crime. Now, I want you to try to think of what sport do you suppose they were talking about. This is the Justice Department's program administrator. We need something really attractive to engage the gangs and the street kids. And the hook is golf. That's right. Golf. Now, the topper is this. Who do you suppose is the chair of this noble program to bring golf for inner-city youth anti-crime prevention? His name is George Herbert Walker Bush. The president's father gets $500,000 for a completely useless pet project. That's the president of the United States and his administration, the leader of the free world. And the presidential nominee of his party, the Republicans, is trying as desperately as he can to get as far away and disassociate himself with Bush. John McCain decided to make an appearance in Iowa the other day, ravaged by the catastrophic floods on the same day that Bush was due to show up. And of course, they both stood around and looked sober and didn't do a damn thing of any use whatsoever. But the one thing that the McCain campaign was sure to say to the press was that the candidate wouldn't, quote, come within 30 miles of the president, unquote. That's the state of the Republican Party. Tom Davis is a veteran monster lawmaker from Virginia in the Congress, and he's one of at least 36 Republicans who's retiring this year, so that means that he can be honest. And he said a number of times now that the Republicans are like, quote, an airplane flying right into a mountain. Which is a kind of a strange image to be conjuring in the post-September 11th world. But that's what he thinks, and actually that's what's commonly accepted in the establishment. And we have to ask the question, what took so long? You know, you got people, you know, the leading lights of the Republican Party. Among them are people like Grover Norquist, right? Who says that his ultimate goal in being an anti-tax pioneer, his ultimate goal was a restoration to the way America was, quote, up until Roosevelt, when the Socialists took over. This is a direct quote. The Socialists took over with the income tax, the death tax regulation, and all that. And I have to tell you, by Roosevelt, he doesn't mean Franklin. He means Teddy Roosevelt. Marching up San Juan Hill, and then he goes to the White House and establishes socialism. So it's really no surprise at all that people are looking to the end of the Bush regime with what is taking so long. Anyone you talk to, the guy who fixed my car the other day is sort of like, maybe we get Bush out of there. Someone will do something about gas prices. You know, business will happen again. Someone I'm talking to in the store, maybe someone get Bush out of there, and maybe someone will talk to other countries of the world instead of threatening them with war. Once we get Bush out of there. That's a change, and to add something else, added to that is something else in this election year that we, of all people, don't underestimate on the Democratic side, which is what it means that an African American has come as close as he has to the White House in a country that was built on slavery, on the barbarism of racism, where the main division in the U.S. working class used time and time and time again to divide each, to conquer both, is racism. Among all the polls that have been flogged around the media about how Obama's support among white workers is supposed to be so weak. What doesn't get mentioned is the other side, the polls that show that, for example, that among young voters, that the fact that Obama is African American is seen as a good thing, that it might not be a detriment in American politics, that diversity in political candidates and political leaders might be a positive thing. That's one side of what Barack Obama has represented in this election. And it's the reason that there's a sense of hope and enthusiasm and expectation that is completely different from things we've encountered in the past, certainly from John Kerry, but of a lot of Democratic presidential candidates before that. But there's another side of it as well, and that's being revealed more and more clearly every day. It seems like, and not just to us, because we know that we're looking for it. We're looking for what Barack Obama stands for, but to the people who do place their hopes and expectations in Obama. And that's the real Obama as opposed to the image. I mean, a lot of us probably haven't read newspapers as much at the conferences we're used to, so it took Jeremy Scahill and some of the outside speakers, Jeremy Scahill and Jeff St. Clair, to tell us that Obama has named his foreign policy team, and on it is the rogues gallery of Democratic Party administration, former administration war criminals, people like Warren Christopher, William Perry, Anthony Lake, and above all, Madeleine Albright. I mean, people have talked over the weekend about Obama's speech at the AIPAC conference, where he committed himself to an undivided Jerusalem, which isn't even the position of the Bush administration. The Father's Day speech at the church on Chicago's South Side, where he renewed his critique he's had for some time of black men. But I want to draw your attention to something, if you didn't see, which is Obama's appointment of the head of his economic advisors, a man called Jason Furman. Now, never mind, Jason Furman is a protege of Robert Rubin, the man behind Clintonomics, and Obama was supposed to be ending the reign of the Clintonites in the Democratic Party. Forget that for a second, because Furman is better known as something else, as the liberal defender against all critics of Walmart. It turns out, according to Jason Furman, that Walmart isn't the anti-union blight on society that you might naively have thought, but really it is, quote, a progressive success story. Now, why do you suppose that is? It's because Walmart undercuts competitors in delivering low-cost goods to low-income customers. And, you know, that's just a miraculous thing, isn't it? I wonder how they do that. It might not have anything to do with the fact that they push down wages. They refuse to give benefits. They drive unions out of every one of their facilities. But that, according to Jason Furman, and this is a phrase that's going to start echoing back to us, that's a price worth paying, according to Jason Furman, because, quote, the collateral damage from these efforts to get Walmart to raise its wages and benefits is way too enormous and damaging to working people and the economy more broadly for me to sit by idly and sing Kumbaya in the interests of progressive harmony. That's right. That's what it's about, singing Kumbaya for Walmart workers. So many people are expecting things to be so different after George Bush and are placing hopes in Barack Obama based on what they know of him and what he says of himself. But you read something like that and you know that when next January rolls around, as seems like the most likely outcome, that Barack Obama becomes the next president, that the occupation of Iraq won't end. That not only will the war on Afghanistan not end, but there, in his own words, could very well be an escalation. The threats of bombing Iran won't end because Obama has told us so himself. There's still a struggle against war that needs to be organized. An economy where U.S. workers are facing an abrupt wage cut, effectively, due to the rising cost of food and the cost of gas. That won't have changed. What Stephanie Smith in Tennessee faces, where the cost of childcare and just getting to work has gotten so expensive that she literally can't afford to go to work. And that's the experience of growing numbers of the working poor. That won't change just because Barack Obama becomes the president. Now, as long as we're on the economy, I want to say, don't think that the rich haven't been affected by this crisis that we've talked about over the course of the weekend. They are affected, absolutely. They're affected for the better. According to the New York Times, quote, for the class of rich who make more than $1 million a year and have several times that in the bank, the time is right for indulgence. And so buyers this year have already closed on more than, this is already in this year, 70 Manhattan apartments in the $10 million plus range compared to 17 in that price range in all of last year. This is a year that witnessed a near meltdown of the Wall Street financial system, and yet according to the people who own the Gold Bar downtown, the $3,000 bottles of cognac, there's no slowdown at all in those trades. For these people who inhabit, you know, another kind of universe, right? It's a parallel world where hard times can be good times at the same time, you know? The crisis that faces the rest of us, to them, is really kind of annoying. You know, for Mark Sperling, a 36-year-old Wall Street parasite who runs an equity trading company, he resents the trouble that the mortgage crisis has caused him. And he says, I don't want to sound harsh. And you know, when someone starts, please, don't be harsh, you know. That would be gauche, don't be harsh. I don't want to sound harsh, but the people who are buying million-dollar houses with a combined household income of $70,000 or $80,000 were the ones who were chasing easy money. Yeah. Unlike Mark Sperling, last year, he took his riches and bought a 4-bedroom condo on the Upper West Side of New York City for more than $4 million. Now, let me do the math for you. That works out to about $1 million a bedroom. If he could spin off one of those bedrooms, he could pay the annual salary of half of the teachers at a moderate-sized elementary school in Manhattan with one bedroom. Now, I don't want to exaggerate or anything. Never. There are areas where even the ultra-super-rich do have to tighten their belts. Justin Sullivan is the managing director of Regent Jet, and he says that his clients in real estate and on Wall Street are switching from privately owned jets to charter. Sullivan talked, I know, it's tough. It's a tough world. Sullivan talked about one of his clients and said this: a year ago, he would have only flown Gulfstreams. Now, it's moving to the point where he's flying beach jets and even Learjets. I mean, these are two worlds, two universes, two Americas, right? Living side by side. A country where, according to Jared Bernstein of the Economic Policy Institute, in the past 90-something years, the U.S. witnessed only one other year of such unequal wealth distribution, and that was 1928, the year before the beginnings of the Great Depression. We know that that won't change because if Barack Obama becomes president, it's going to take nothing less and nothing more than a struggle to change that. Just like ending Jim Crow segregation in this country wasn't won, as civil rights activists hoped, and those who sympathized with civil rights hoped, with the election of John F. Kennedy, but it took a struggle to pressure John F. Kennedy to make sure that happened. When the Supreme Court ruled in favor of school desegregation, it wasn't enough that the ruling was there, but it had to be fought for on the ground by the children and the parents of those who went to the Little Rock School and many, many more beyond. Or the New Deal programs that we value, that they weren't granted when Franklin Roosevelt, who ran in 1932 on a balanced budget platform, was inaugurated. It took a struggle. It took a struggle from below to make those laws mean what they've come to mean for us in terms of the rights of workers. And this is going to be, I think, a different election experience for the ISO than what we're used to. It's one of these, I think there's a strange thing about this period that we're living through, is that the enthusiasm for Obama among the people on our side is much higher than it was for John Kerry in 2004, inconceivably higher. But at the same time, what people have described at this conference and experienced in the months leading up to this is that those groups of people are more open to a discussion about Obama's limitations and the wider political question about winning bigger changes than just getting rid of the Republicans in the White House and in Washington. It has everything to do with a different character of this period, that instead of the negative, lesser evil, anything but Bush fog that was all over the 2004 election, that people are looking to this election with the expectation that something's going to be different. And not just this election, but the scale of the crisis that we talked about last night and throughout the weekend is leading to a sense that something has to change, that something has to change. And we have to reach the people who are becoming politicized and energized, whether it's directly connected to the election or whether it's some other immediate question, and have the discussions about where Obama is headed, but even more so about the questions that are presenting themselves right now, urgent questions that demand answers right now: the food prices and a global food revolt, oil prices, the wars in the Middle East and the threat of more, healthcare, layoffs starting to bite. They demand answers. Questions like, why in a world where the rising cost of oil is wreaking havoc on one sector of the economy after another, on one country after another, throwing them into crisis, why are a handful of corporations allowed to enjoy the most immense profits ever known in the history of the world, and left unhindered to do that? Why does the United States spend as much on its barbaric occupations in the Middle East in 2 months as could feed, according to the United Nations statistics, the entire world for a year? Why is the price of food going up and more than 100 million people expected to be pushed into malnutrition when there's enough food grown around the world? These are the kind of questions, and the reason is that we live in a society that doesn't care ultimately about those things, that doesn't care about war, that doesn't care, the people at the top don't care about starvation when there's their power and their wealth that's at stake. And we know that questions like that are not going to be answered with the election of the next president. They require socialist answers, a struggle to change society in the here and now, and the vision of a world based on the principles of solidarity, democracy, and justice. There's such pressing questions that are taking place now that we know that we're going to see resistance in the here and now. And we've seen it represented here at this conference in the opposition to war among Iraqis, among veterans of that war, among students and more. We've seen it in the struggle for workers' rights. We can strengthen those struggles as they take place and use all the resources that we have to give them a greater and a wider voice. Not only the questions that are being asked, but the answers that are being given in the struggles that are taking place right now about what needs to be done in this world. But we also know something else, which is that come next January, there's still a war that's going to need to be stopped. There's still occupations in the Middle East that are going to have to be ended. There's still a system that produces poverty that's going to have to be fought. There's still a struggle to change society. And what we can do right now is to build up the relationships, to build up the networks, and meet the people who can be part of those struggles of the future. Because what we do now is going to shape what that moment after January is going to look like for us, for the left, and for all those who are engaged in the struggle for a better world, cleansed of oppression, violence, and exploitation.
Thank you, Alan.